What if one social media post could shake the foundation of North American trade? That's exactly what happened when President Donald Trump signaled he might block the opening of one of the most important trade crossings on the continent, the Gordie Howe International Bridge. What started as a political message quickly exploded into something far bigger. Tonight it's not just about a bridge, it's about power. It's about influence. And it's about who really controls the flow of billions of dollars in trade between the United States and Canada. Here's what unfolded. Congressional Democrats announced they were launching an investigation. Their concern: a potential conflict of interest surrounding Trump's threat to delay or interfere with the bridge's opening. Why? Because just days before Trump posted about blocking the project, there was reportedly a private meeting between the owner of the long-dominant Ambassador Bridge and U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. Then came the post, and Washington lit up. To understand why this caused such an uproar, you need to understand what's at stake. The Gordie Howe Bridge is not just another construction project. It's a multi-billion-dollar trade corridor connecting Windsor, Ontario and Detroit, Michigan. Once fully operational, it will handle thousands of trucks a day. Auto parts, machinery, agricultural goods, manufacturing components. Nearly a quarter of all merchandise trade between the U.S. and Canada flows through this corridor. Read that again. A quarter. That's not local traffic. That's continental economic blood flow. And for decades, most of that heavy truck traffic has depended on a single privately owned crossing, the Ambassador Bridge. The Ambassador Bridge has operated as a near monopoly for commercial freight in this corridor. Owned by a wealthy Detroit-based family, it has controlled the toll revenues and the traffic flow for generations. Every 18-wheeler hauling car parts across the Detroit River. Every truck carrying agricultural exports. Every shipment keeping North America's auto industry running. All funneled through one gatekeeper. Now imagine what happens when a brand new, publicly governed bridge opens just down the river: more lanes, direct freeway connections, faster customs processing, and most importantly, competition. For monopoly holders, competition isn't just an inconvenience. It's revenue erosion. That's where the controversy begins to make sense. When reports surfaced that the Ambassador Bridge owner had met privately with a senior government official shortly before Trump's public threat, lawmakers started asking questions. Was this simple lobbying, or was federal authority about to be used to protect a private monopoly? The timing raised red flags, because this wasn't just about delaying a ribbon-cutting ceremony. If the federal government interfered at the final hour, after permits were approved, treaties honored, financing secured, and construction nearly complete, it would set a massive precedent. It would mean executive power could override years of binational agreements, and that possibility alarmed Congress. Fast lawmakers began framing the issue differently. This wasn't about politics anymore. It was about supply chain resilience, about national security, about economic stability. Behind closed doors, officials used one word again and again: vulnerability. Right now, heavy freight between Detroit and Windsor relies heavily on a single privately controlled bridge. What happens if there's mechanical failure? A protest? A shutdown? A geopolitical dispute? Supply chains could choke overnight. Factories would slow, assembly lines would pause, consumer prices would spike. The new bridge was designed to fix that, to add redundancy, to create a second artery. Blocking it wouldn't just protect a toll revenue stream, it would preserve a structural weak point in North American trade. That realization changed everything inside Washington. The conversation shifted from "should the bridge open" to something deeper: should any president have the unilateral power to block critical infrastructure after all approvals are complete? That question is still echoing through Congress tonight. And this is only the beginning, because what happens next could redefine how infrastructure, executive authority, and private influence intersect in America. But to understand just how big this battle is, we need to zoom out, because this fight isn't just about steel and concrete. It's about control over the movement of commerce itself. And once you see that clearly, the stakes become impossible to ignore. The monopoly that built an empire for decades. The Ambassador Bridge wasn't just a bridge. It was a toll booth on the North American economy. If you wanted to move heavy freight between Detroit and Windsor, you went through that crossing. There was no real alternative for trucks. That kind of dominance creates power. Not just economic power, political leverage. When one private entity controls tens of millions of dollars in toll revenue every year, that entity becomes a major player in regional and national politics. And that's exactly what happened. The Detroit-Windsor corridor is one of the busiest commercial arteries in the world. The North American auto industry depends on it. Car parts cross the border multiple times before a finished vehicle rolls off an assembly line. An engine block may start in Michigan, travel to Ontario for machining, return to the U.S. for assembly, cross back again before final installation. It's an integrated manufacturing system built on seamless border movement. Now imagine even a few hours of disruption. Production schedules unravel. Factories fall behind. Workers get sent home early. That's why redundancy matters. The Gordie Howe International Bridge was designed to solve exactly that problem. It introduces publicly governed competition into a corridor long dominated by private control, and that changes the equation completely. When you introduce a second route, you don't just reduce congestion, you reduce dependency, and dependency is power. For years, critics argued that relying on a single privately owned crossing was risky. Mechanical failures, labor disputes, geopolitical tensions, any one of those could choke trade. The new bridge adds insurance. But for the existing monopoly holder, that insurance looks like a threat. Because once trucks have a choice, toll pricing power weakens. Revenue projections change. Market dominance shrinks. And when billions of dollars are involved, that kind of shift doesn't go unnoticed. That's why lawmakers reacted so strongly to the timing of the reported meeting. The concern wasn't casual influence. It was structural interference. If federal authority could be used to delay a fully approved binational infrastructure project at the last minute, what would stop future administrations from doing the same? What message would that send to allies? The Gordie Howe Bridge wasn't built in isolation. It was negotiated between two countries. Financing agreements were structured, ownership frameworks were locked in, international permits were secured. You don't unwind that lightly. If executive discretion could override all of that, it would ripple far beyond Detroit. Investors would hesitate. Governments would question long-term reliability. Supply chain planners would reassess risk. That's why Congress moved quickly. Lawmakers began exploring legislative safeguards, not to strip presidential oversight entirely, but to narrow the window for late-stage political interference. They started asking, once a project reaches operational readiness under existing legal frameworks, should its activation be protected from political recalibration? In simpler terms, once the deal is done, can politics still stop it? Because if the answer is yes, then every future trade corridor becomes vulnerable to shifting agendas, and that would inject volatility into the heart of continental logistics. This debate is now bigger than one bridge. It's about whether infrastructure can be treated as a political tool, or whether it must be protected as economic lifelines. And the deeper Congress digs, the clearer one truth becomes. This episode may permanently reshape how America handles cross-border infrastructure, but the implications go even further. Because in today's world, infrastructure isn't passive. It's leverage. And when leverage intersects with presidential authority, things get explosive. Infrastructure as power. Here's something most people don't think about. Bridges are geopolitical tools. Ports are leverage. Pipelines are influence. Digital cables are strategic assets. In modern geopolitics, infrastructure equals power. Control access to it or threaten to, and you can shape economic outcomes just as effectively as tariffs or sanctions. That's why this episode struck such a nerve. If a president can threaten to block a major trade artery after completion, that becomes a bargaining chip. And bargaining chips at that level affect entire industries. The Gordie Howe International Bridge will move more than vehicles. It will move industrial output from assembly plants, agricultural exports from interior supply networks, time-sensitive manufacturing components feeding synchronized production cycles. It will carry commuters who sustain cross-border employment ecosystems. It may even facilitate defense-linked materials within North America's integrated security manufacturing base. Each of those streams represents stability or instability. Interruptions at crossings like this don't stay local. They propagate, procurement contracts get delayed, labor shifts get adjusted, inventory buffers shrink, export commitments get strained. Even temporary disruption can create quarterly losses. That's why lawmakers rejected the idea that this was about scheduling. They saw something deeper, a test case. If private economic influence, amplified through political access, could shape federal infrastructure outcomes at the final stage, what precedent would that set? Could future projects be pressured? Could executive leverage override decade-old international frameworks? Could trade corridors become bargaining tools? Those questions are driving congressional action right now. Committees are examining presidential permit protections. Policy staff are reviewing how to codify project continuity once treaties are ratified. The goal is simple, rule-based governance, not political volatility. Because once infrastructure reaches completion thresholds, it becomes systemic. It's no longer a campaign talking point. It's part of the economic architecture, and architecture must be stable. If you remove stability, markets react. Investors hesitate. Allies reconsider commitments. That's the broader lesson emerging from this confrontation. Infrastructure fights are never just about concrete. They're about who controls movement. And when movement equals commerce, control equals power. But there's still one big question left. Did Congress just shut down any path for interference? Or is this battle far from over? The power shift. No one saw coming when U.S. lawmakers stepped in. Something subtle but powerful happened. The narrative changed. Instead of asking whether the bridge should open, Congress began asserting that once infrastructure clears all approvals and reaches operational readiness, activation should proceed under institutional continuity. In other words, politics shouldn't stop it. That shift may have closed the door on unilateral interference. By launching investigations and exploring safeguards, lawmakers sent a signal. Critical trade corridors are not transactional assets. They are systemic lifelines, and systemic lifelines cannot swing with political winds. This is bigger than Trump, bigger than one billionaire, bigger than one bridge. It's about governance in an age where infrastructure equals economic security. If Congress succeeds in codifying protections, future presidents, regardless of party, may face tighter limits on late-stage intervention. That would reinforce a principle markets crave: predictability. Because trade doesn't thrive on drama, it thrives on continuity. And here's the payoff. The real battle wasn't about stopping construction. The bridge is nearly complete. The real battle was about precedent. Could executive power override international agreements at the final hour? Congress's reaction suggests that answer may soon be no. And that matters. Because in a world where supply chains are fragile and geopolitical tensions run high, redundancy isn't optional. It's survival. The Gordie Howe International Bridge represents more than steel spanning a river. It represents a second artery, a backup plan, a resilience upgrade. Blocking it would have preserved dependency. Opening it strengthens stability. And stability is the quiet force that keeps economies moving. So here's the question for you. Should any leader have the power to halt fully approved trade lifelines at the final stage? Or should infrastructure, once cleared, be shielded from political turbulence? Drop your thoughts below, because this fight over one bridge may shape how America handles infrastructure power for decades to come. And if you think this is the last time infrastructure becomes a political battlefield, think again. This is just the beginning.